600 girls, their screams lost in the stone walls of a remote castle. Their blood drained, not for war, not for justice, but for beauty. The woman behind it all was no desperate peasant, no deranged criminal hiding in shadows. She was one of the most powerful aristocrats of the 16th century Europe. Related to kings, wealthy beyond measure, she had everything, except what she feared most: the passing of time. Her name was Elizabeth Báthory, and legend says she found the most twisted answer in human history to the question of aging. Bathe in the blood of virgins. Was it true? Did a noblewoman really create a murder factory, turning innocence into ingredients for eternal youth? Or was she the victim of a smear campaign so dark that it buried her under centuries of horror? Tonight, we enter the broken ruins of Čachtice Castle. We will trace the whispers, the testimonies, the blood-stained legends, and uncover why Elizabeth Báthory still haunts us as the Blood Countess. But to understand how vanity could turn into carnage, we must begin in the heart of a Hungary torn between war, superstition, and power. To understand how Elizabeth Báthory became the woman remembered as the Blood Countess, we need to step into the brutal and unstable world of 16th century Hungary, a land caught between empires, where cruelty was not an exception, but a way of life. A world on fire. The year was 1560. Hungary was a kingdom divided. The mighty Habsburgs held the west, the Ottoman Empire pressed from the east, and the shadowy Principality of Transylvania tried to balance between them. This wasn't just geography. It was war. Castles weren't fairy tale palaces, but fortresses on battlefronts. Soldiers bled daily, villages burned, and power was measured in land, titles, and bloodlines. Into this world, Elizabeth was born. Not as an ordinary child, but as the heiress of one of Europe's most powerful families. The Bathorys controlled vast estates, commanded armies, and were tied by marriage to kings and dukes. From birth, Elizabeth's life was entwined with politics, privilege, and danger. A childhood of contradictions. Elizabeth's childhood was marked by contradictions. She grew up in castles filled with tapestries, servants, and tutors. She learned Latin, German, and Hungarian, an education rare even for noblewomen. Yet the world outside her books was soaked in blood. Public executions were family entertainment. Torture wasn't whispered about. It was displayed as a lesson. Some chronicles claim that even as a child, Elizabeth watched executions with unnerving fascination, staring at the faces of the dying as if memorizing every twitch of agony. Whether this is truth or legend, it reflects how later generations understand of Hungary. He was feared for his cruelty on the battlefield, impaling prisoners of war and leaving their bodies to rot as warnings to enemies. When Elizabeth married him at 15, she entered into more than a union of noble houses. She entered a partnership in brutality. While Ferenc spent years away fighting the Ottomans, Elizabeth managed their estates, commanded servants, and ruled the peasants. Witnesses later claimed Ferenc even taught her torture techniques during his visits home. Whether exaggerated or not, their marriage cemented her reputation as a woman with both wealth and terrifying independence. Women and power. This independence mattered. In a deeply patriarchal society, Elizabeth's position was precarious. Noblewomen were expected to bear children, manage households, and obey quietly. Elizabeth did all of this, but she also commanded land, wealth, and hundreds of lives in her absence of her husband. Powerful women were often feared, even demonized. If a man ruled with an iron fist, he was a strong leader. If a woman did, she was unnatural, dangerous. That double standard would later haunt Elizabeth when accusations arose. The perfect storm. By the time Elizabeth became a widow in 1604, she was one of the most powerful landowners in Hungary. She had estates across the region, influence at court, and no husband to answer to. But she also had enemies, rivals jealous of her independence, nobles eager for her lands, and a crown constantly in debt, hungry for an excuse to seize her wealth. And surrounding all of this was a society obsessed with superstition. Witch trials raged. Alchemy promised eternal life. Blood was seen as the essence of vitality, capable of curing illness or restoring health. In that climate, rumors that a noblewoman was using blood for beauty would not only be believable, they would be irresistible. A portrait of suspicion. So here we have Elizabeth Báthory at the dawn of the 17th century. A widow in her 40s, powerful, wealthy, and feared. A woman commanding estates in a world where women were supposed to be silent. A land drowning in superstition, war, and paranoia. It was the perfect recipe for legend. Any harsh punishment of a servant could be twisted into horror. Any disappearance could feed a rumor, and any rival could exploit whispers to destroy her. But whispers alone cannot explain the legend of the Blood Countess. To see how Elizabeth's name became a synonym for terror, we must step into the realm of the stories, the chilling legends and contradictory rumors that transformed her into a monster. If Elizabeth Báthory's life had ended with wealth, children, and widowhood, she might have been remembered only as another Hungarian countess navigating the storms of war and politics. But what a noblewoman obsessed with preserving her beauty at any cost. The first disappearances. It began quietly. Peasant families noticed their daughters never returned after being hired to work at Čachtice Castle. At first, the absences were explained away: sickness, accidents, or runaway servants. But soon, the rumors grew sharper. Girls were vanishing too often, and the castle's walls seemed to swallow them whole. Servants whispered about punishments that went beyond discipline. A dropped needle, an unwashed garment, a misstep on the stairs. All were said to provoke Elizabeth's wrath. Witnesses later described beatings so severe that blood pooled on the floors, and girls left crippled or dead. Tortures beyond imagination. From there, the legends spiraled. Elizabeth, they said, invented cruel games of suffering. Girls forced to strip naked and march into the snow, then drenched with freezing water until their bodies stiffened like statues. Others branded with hot irons, flesh seared and blackened. Still others pierced with needles, cut with blades, or left to starve in locked chambers. One chilling account claimed Elizabeth bit into the flesh of her victims, tearing chunks away as if she were no longer fully human, but some predator feeding on youth. But the most infamous tale, the one that sealed her place in history, was the bloodbath. The birth of the Blood Countess. According to legend, one day a maid accidentally tugged too hard while combing Elizabeth's hair. Enraged, the Countess struck her, drawing blood. When the droplets splashed against Elizabeth's hand, she thought the skin looked smoother, more youthful. That moment, the story goes, became her revelation. Blood was the key to eternal youth, and so began the rituals that transformed her from a cruel mistress into the Blood Countess. In these tales, Elizabeth would collect the blood of her victims in basins, sometimes even suspending them upside down to be drained like livestock. She was said to bathe in the crimson liquid, immersing herself as though in holy water, convinced she was washing away the years. Some even whispered she drank the blood mixed with wine, a grotesque parody of communion. Whether true or not, the imagery was irresistible and unforgettable. 600 victims? The scale of the rumors was staggering. Some villagers spoke of dozens of deaths. Others swore it was hundreds. One sensational account claimed Elizabeth kept a ledger recording the names of over 650 girls, No such book has ever been found, but the number spread like wildfire, ensuring her place as one of history's most prolific killers. The detail mattered less than the sheer enormity. To imagine a single woman murdering 600 innocents turned her from a criminal into something supernatural. Less human, more monster. Powerless to demand answers. But according to legend, Elizabeth's appetite grew bolder. She began targeting daughters of lesser nobility. This was her fatal mistake. Unlike peasants, these families had influence. They had connections, money, and voices that could not be ignored. If the whispers are to be believed, it was only when noble daughters began to disappear that the crown finally acted. Testimonies and confessions. When Elizabeth was investigated in 1610, hundreds of testimonies were recorded. Villagers described screams echoing from the castle. Servants admitted to burying bodies in secret. Some claimed to have seen blood-stained rooms and torture chambers. Yet, curiously, none of the depositions mention Elizabeth bathing in blood. That detail, the very heart of her legend, appears only in later retellings. Was it a forgotten truth, or an embellishment added by storytellers eager to make her crimes unforgettable? The vampire connection. By the 18th century, Elizabeth's story fused with the rising vampire folklore of Central Europe. A noblewoman draining youth from virgins fit perfectly with superstitions about blood drinkers. In some versions, she was not merely cruel, she was undead, a vampiress haunting her castle, feeding on innocence. Writers and poets eagerly embellished the imagery. Soon, Elizabeth wasn't just a cruel countess, she was a forerunner of Dracula, her baths of blood becoming a Gothic archetype. The power of a story. Whether true or exaggerated, the rumors served a purpose. They painted Elizabeth as more than a woman. They made her a monster. And in an age where powerful women were rare, what better way to destroy one than by convincing the world she fed on virgins to preserve her beauty? But the deeper question lingers. Did Elizabeth Báthory truly orchestrate this slaughterhouse of blood? Or was her legend carefully crafted by enemies eager to seize her land and wealth? To answer that, we must leave the fog of rumor and examine what survives in black ink and parchment. The depositions, the testimonies, the official records. What do the documents say about the woman called the Blood Countess? The legends of Elizabeth Báthory are as vivid as they are terrifying, but legends are slippery things. To separate fact from nightmare, we must turn to what remains: the records of her arrest, the testimonies of her contemporaries, and the fragmentary documents that survive. What we find is not clarity, but shadows. The arrest at Čachtice. On December 29, 1610, Palatine Georgi Thurzo, acting under the orders of King Matthias II, stormed Čachtice Castle with his men. Accounts claim that what they discovered was shocking: mutilated bodies scattered in rooms, girls imprisoned and half dead, torture devices smeared with blood. But here's the problem. None of these descriptions come from eyewitness reports written at the time of the raid. They appear later, in embellished chronicles. What Thurzo himself more restrained, mentioning grievous evidence without details. Was this discretion meant to preserve dignity, or a sign that the more lurid details were added later to strengthen the case? The depositions. Between 1610 and 1611, over 300 depositions were gathered. Villagers, priests, and nobles gave testimony. Servants described helping bury bodies. Others claimed to have seen Elizabeth striking and torturing girls. These documents are the backbone of the case. They present Elizabeth as a cruel mistress whose punishments often turned lethal. Witnesses spoke of beatings, starvation, and unexplained disappearances. But a closer reading reveals cracks. Most of the testimonies are hearsay, people repeating what others told them. Many came from peasants who feared both their noble overlords and the crown's investigators. And crucially, the depositions were collected under conditions where torture and intimidation were common. Truth in such a climate is difficult to trust. The servants' confessions. Elizabeth's four closest servants, Dorothea Zentes, Ilona Jo, János Újvári, nicknamed Fichko, and Katarina Benica, were tried separately. Their confessions painted Elizabeth as the mastermind of countless murders. But these confessions were extracted under torture. They admitted to horrific details. Girls frozen, burned, mutilated, but also implicated themselves. Was this truth spilling out under agony or survival instinct, telling their interrogators what they wanted to hear? All four were executed brutally. Their deaths served as public proof of guilt. Elizabeth herself, however, was never brought to trial. Why no trial? This remains one of the strangest features of the case. Elizabeth Báthory was never formally tried in court. Instead, she was confined within her own castle, walled into a set of rooms where she remained until her death in 1614. Why deny a trial? If her guilt was undeniable, a trial would have showcased justice. But if the evidence was weak, a public trial might have exposed inconsistencies, or worse, revealed a conspiracy. By imprisoning her quietly, the crown avoided scandal while seizing her vast estates. It is worth remembering, King Matthias owed Elizabeth's family a considerable debt. Stripping her of property conveniently solved that problem. Was the investigation driven by justice or by politics and greed? The question of numbers. One of the most shocking claims was that Elizabeth killed 650 girls, supposedly recorded in a ledger. This figure comes from the testimony of a servant girl who said she once saw such a book. No ledger has ever been found. Historians believe the number is an exaggeration. Perhaps dozens of victims existed, maybe more, but 600 seems logistically impossible. Even so, the number stuck. Why? Because it transforms Elizabeth from a cruel aristocrat into a figure of almost supernatural evil.
Legend: silence on the bloodbaths.
Here lies a striking fact. In the surviving documents, no witness ever claimed to see Elizabeth bathing in blood. The central image of her legend, the Crimson Bath of Youth, appears nowhere in contemporary testimony. It emerges only later, in the 18th century accounts, when vampire lore was sweeping Europe. This doesn't prove the rituals never happened, but it does suggest they may have been inventions of folklore, grafted onto her story to make it unforgettable. Historians debate. Modern scholars remain divided. Some, like Laszlo Nagy, argue Elizabeth was framed. She was a wealthy widow in a patriarchal society, easy prey for political rivals eager to seize her lands. The bloodbaths were nothing more than propaganda. Others, like Kimberly Craft, accept that Elizabeth committed real atrocities, even if exaggerated. According to this view, she may not have slaughtered 600 girls, but she did rule with cruelty, and dozens of young women likely died under her care. A third camp sees her as both villain and victim, guilty of abuse, but not of the monstrous scale attributed to her. What can we believe? From the documents, a few things are certain. Elizabeth was accused of murder and cruelty between 1602 and 1610. Over 300 depositions were collected, though many were hearsay. Her servants confessed under torture and were executed. She herself was never tried, but imprisoned until death. No direct evidence of bloodbaths exists in contemporary records. Beyond that, we enter the fog of rumor, myth, and political maneuvering. Elizabeth Báthory may have been a sadistic killer, or she may have been a victim of one of the most successful character assassinations in European history. The evidence is fragmentary, contradictory, and tainted. But whatever the truth of the documents, the legends did not stop with her death. For centuries, strange stories, ghostly phenomena, and eerie whispers have continued to surround the ruins of Čachtice Castle. Let us turn now to the unexplained, the hauntings and chilling accounts that keep the Blood Countess alive in memory. The trial records may be fragmentary, the testimonies may be riddled with contradictions, but in the centuries since Elizabeth Báthory's death, one thing has never faded: the sense that her presence still lingers. The ruins of Čachtice Castle are not silent. They are alive with whispers, shadows, and stories of things that defy explanation. The ruins that breathe.
Čachtice Castle today is little more than broken stone walls on a hilltop in Slovakia. Yet countless visitors describe the same eerie sensation, that the castle itself breathes. Cold drafts coil through rooms where no windows remain. Footsteps echo where none are walking. At night, locals insist they hear distant screams carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. Cries of young girls who never left the castle alive. Travelers in the 19th century wrote of oppressive atmospheres so heavy that they fled the ruins after minutes. Modern paranormal investigators bring cameras and audio recorders, and many leave claiming they captured unexplainable sounds, whispers, sighs, even a woman's scream. Skeptics dismiss these as tricks of wind and acoustics, but to those who've stood within the walls, the air is too thick with dread to ignore. The White Lady of Čachtice. Among the most persistent legends is that of the White Lady. Witnesses describe a tall, elegant woman in flowing white robes drifting through the ruins. Sometimes she appears at the crumbled tower. Sometimes she moves silently through the underground dungeons. Some believe the White Lady is Elizabeth herself, her spirit cursed to haunt the place of her downfall. Others argue she is one of her countless victims, eternally searching for peace. Those who claim to have seen her often describe not fear, but sorrow, the impression of deep, unending grief radiating from her ghostly figure. Bleeding walls. Another phenomenon haunts the castle, the so-called bleeding walls. During heavy rains, visitors have reported streaks of red seeping through the stones, as though the fortress itself were weeping blood. Geologists explain this as iron oxide deposits leaching from the rock. Yet the symbolism is undeniable. A castle that remembers. A fortress stained with the blood of its past. Cursed investigators. Elizabeth's story has not only terrified peasants and tourists. Scholars who probed too deeply have also encountered strange fates. In the 18th century, a historian researching the Bathory family died mysteriously in his sleep after weeks of nightmares, in which he wrote, "A pale hand pressed over my face." In the 20th century, a Czech journalist disappeared for days while investigating the castle. When found, he was disoriented and could not recall where he had been. Are these coincidences? Or echoes of a curse, punishing those who dare to dig too deep into Elizabeth's secrets? Nightmares of visitors. It is not only historians. Ordinary visitors often report disturbing dreams after spending time in Čachtice. Some dream of being trapped in stone chambers, others of drowning in crimson pools. A few awaken with scratches or bruises they cannot explain. Psychologists argue this is suggestion at work. Visitors know the legend, and their minds create the nightmares. But for those who wake with physical marks, suggestion is a weak comfort. The energy of suffering. Parapsychologists speak of residual energy, trauma so intense it imprints itself on a place. If Elizabeth truly tormented and killed dozens of girls, then Čachtice Castle would be saturated with that energy. Even skeptics acknowledge the ruins have an aura unlike other medieval sites. Heavier, darker, as if grief clings of fear. Monster or martyr? The most unsettling question is not whether Elizabeth's ghost haunts the castle, but whose spirit it might be. If she truly murdered hundreds, perhaps she is cursed to wander eternally among her victims. But if she was innocent, framed and walled alive in her own castle, then perhaps her sorrow haunts the ruins instead. Either way, the supernatural stories echo the ambiguity of her life. Was she the predator or the prey? Why the hauntings endure? The legends of Čachtice endure not because they can be proven, but because they resonate. They speak to our deepest fears, the loss of innocence, the corruption of power, the terror that cruelty leaves a permanent scar not only on people, but on places. For every scream heard on the wind, every pale figure glimpsed in the ruins, every red streak on the stone, Elizabeth Báthory's story lives on, not just in history books, but in the imaginations of all who dare to step into her castle. But Elizabeth's legacy does not end with hauntings. Her story has bled into literature, cinema, and popular culture. She has become not only a ghost of the past, but an immortal icon of horror. Let us now trace the modern legacy of the Blood Countess and how she continues to shape the stories we tell today. Elizabeth Báthory died over 400 years ago, sealed behind the walls of her own castle. Yet her name refuses to stay buried. If anything, she has grown more powerful in death than she ever was in life, an enduring symbol of horror, vanity, and the corruption of power. Her story did not end in the 17th century. It transformed, adapted, and continues to haunt modern culture, from countess to vampire. In the decades after her death, Elizabeth was remembered in Hungary as a cruel noblewoman. But by the 18th century, her story fused with the rising tide of vampire folklore sweeping across Central and Eastern Europe. Tales of nobles who drained peasants for their blood were already common. Elizabeth, accused of bathing in virgin's blood, was the perfect candidate for transformation into myth. By the 19th century, she was being directly compared to fictional monsters. While Bram Stoker's Dracula never mentions her by name, scholars have long noted the parallels. A Transylvanian aristocrat, preying on youth, seeking immortality through blood. Elizabeth Báthory became the female shadow of Dracula, the archetype of the vampiric seductress. Literature and theater. Writers seized on her legend. Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, 1872, one of the earliest vampire tales featuring a female predator, echoes the imagery of Elizabeth. In the 20th century, novelists began writing her directly into stories, portraying her as both villain and tragic figure. Plays staged across Europe reimagined her as a bloodthirsty tyrant or a misunderstood woman destroyed by patriarchy. Each retelling reshaped her image, sometimes a monster, sometimes a martyr, sometimes both at once. Cinema and television. The silver screen carried her legend into the modern age. Hammer Horror's Countess Dracula, 1971, dramatized her obsession with blood as a beauty ritual, cementing the image in pop culture. More recent films, like Bathory, 2008, attempt to humanize her, suggesting she may have been a victim of political intrigue rather than a mass murderer. Television has also kept her alive. In American Horror Story Hotel, Lady Gaga played a vampiric countess clearly inspired by Elizabeth. Documentaries on the History Channel, Netflix, and National Geographic dissect her crimes with forensic detail, offering both horror and speculation. Music, art, and subculture. Elizabeth's reach extends even further. Heavy metal and gothic bands have written songs about her, celebrating her as a dark icon. Artists paint her portrait in dripping crimson, half beautiful, half ghastly. Within Gothic subcultures, she is often embraced as a symbol of dark femininity, both feared and admired, damned and immortal. Even video games borrow her image. From Castlevania to Fate Grand Order, characters modeled on Elizabeth appear as vampiric sorceresses, proof that her legend remains fertile ground for fantasy. Tourism and memory. Today, the ruins of Čachtice Castle draw thousands of visitors. Tour guides recount both the facts and the legends, blending history with horror for wide-eyed audiences. Shops sell souvenirs. Wine bottles labeled Blood Countess. Postcards of the White Lady. Trinkets shaped like crimson drops. But her memory divides the region. Some Slovakians resent that their heritage is reduced to one gruesome story. Others embrace it as a source of identity, a chilling tale that sets their land apart from the rest of Europe. The enduring ambiguity. What makes Elizabeth's legacy so enduring is its ambiguity. If she truly killed hundreds, she is history's most prolific female serial killer. If she was framed, she is one of its greatest victims of injustice. Either way, her story speaks to universal fears of aging, of vanity, of power without accountability. She embodies contradictions that still fascinate us: beauty and horror, power and vulnerability, legend and fact. And that is why 4 centuries later, she still commands our imagination. A mirror for our time. Elizabeth's story also carries a warning. She reminds us that cruelty can be hidden behind walls of privilege, that wealth and power often protect the guilty, and that societies love to demonize women who step outside prescribed roles. The Blood Countess is not just a figure of the past, she is a mirror, a reflection of our own obsessions with youth, our own tolerance of corruption, and our own hunger for sensational stories that blur fact and myth. And so, we come to the end of her tale, but you to decide for yourself. The ruins of Čachtice Castle stand silent against the sky. Stones that once echoed with laughter, with prayers, with screams, now crumble in the wind. Yet Elizabeth Báthory's name still lives, spoken in whispers, etched in books, flickering on screens. Was she the cruelest woman in history, or one of its most tragic scapegoats? The evidence is fractured. Hundreds of depositions, but mostly hearsay. Servants who confessed, but only under torture. A castle raid described in vague terms, later swollen by centuries of embellishment. And the most iconic image, the baths of blood, does not appear in the original records at all. It was born in rumor, then sculpted by time into legend. But legend has power. For 4 centuries, the image of Elizabeth Báthory as the Blood Countess has terrified, fascinated, and inspired. Whether guilty or framed, she became larger than life, a symbol of vanity, cruelty, and the dangers of unchecked power. And perhaps that is the true horror of her story. If she really killed, then hundreds of innocent girls perished in silence, their lives forgotten while her name was immortalized. If she was innocent, then she was buried alive not only in stone walls, but in lies crafted by those who wanted her destroyed. Either way, Elizabeth's shadow still asks the same haunting question. How far will humanity go to preserve youth, power, and beauty? Her story forces us to look in the mirror. We live in a world still obsessed with eternal youth, still corrupted by power, still hungry for scapegoats. The Blood Countess may belong to the past, but the fears she embodies are very much alive. And so, I leave the question to you. Do you believe Elizabeth Báthory was truly a sadistic predator who bathed in the blood of virgins? Or was she the victim of one of history's darkest smear campaigns? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know how you see the legend of the Blood Countess. If you found this story chilling, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Hidden History Vault, and join us as we uncover more shadows from the past. Stories of tragedy, mystery, and secrets the world tried to forget. Because history is never only about what happened. It is about what we remember and what we fear.